She had looked for him at the gala. This was the specific accounting she did later, when she had the distance and the clear eyes for it. She had looked for Arthur at the gala, in the specific moment after the Marchioness had finished speaking, and the room had the quality of a gathering that had received something and was waiting to see what happened next. She had turned her head. She had found him at the end of the table, wine glass in hand, with the expression that she would spend 4 years returning to in the accounting, not embarrassed, not angry on her behalf, not preparing to respond, simply watching, with the quality of a man who found the situation mildly interesting as a social event and not particularly relevant as a matter of his own obligation. He had caught her eye. He had shrugged. She had understood, in the specific cold clarity of that shrug, something she had not been willing to understand before, not because she lacked the intelligence to see it, but because the seeing of it required the acknowledgement of what it meant, and the acknowledgement had felt like the end of something she had invested significantly in and that she had not been ready to lose. She had been ready to lose it now. She had not shown it. She had turned back to the Marchioness with the composed quality she had been developing since she understood that composure was the only instrument available to her in a marriage that did not provide the other instruments. And she had managed the moment with the specific dignity of a woman who had decided that dignity was what she had, and that she was not going to let anyone take it. Sterling had been across the room. She had not known this at the time. She had not known about Sterling's specific presence at any of the 3 occasions until the throne room, when he had told the court what he had seen, and she had stood in the marble floor and had received this information, that he had been watching from the shadows at the gala, that he had been at the tree line during the hunt, with the particular quality of someone receiving information that retroactively reorganized events they had thought they understood. She had thought she was alone in those moments. She had not been. But before we go to the throne room, before we stand on the marble floor with the forged letters and the crowd calling for arrest, and Arthur stepping backward into the space that made her isolation visible, I need to ask you something. If you had been watching someone you cared about endure something twice, from a distance, because you respected the structure that required your distance, and then you watched them be abandoned a 3rd time, in the most consequential possible setting, by the person whose obligation it was to protect them, what would the 3rd one feel like differently from the first 2? Drop your answer in the comments, because Sterling watched all 3, and the 3rd one put him through the iron doors. Subscribe and hit the bell. And tell me where you are watching from tonight, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room now. Let's begin. The Diamond Gala had been in January, which was the specific social occasion of the new year that organized the first quarter of the aristocratic calendar around itself. Clara had been 27. She had been married to Arthur for 2 years, which was long enough to have the specific knowledge of a woman who has been paying careful attention to someone across, enough time to have a thorough picture of who they actually are. The picture was, Arthur was not a coward in the ordinary sense of someone who was afraid. He was something more specific, which was a man who had organized his entire understanding of the world around the question of what was advantageous to him, and who had determined, through the specific logic of this organization, that the defense of Clara's dignity at the gala was not advantageous in the way that his business relationship with the Marchioness's family was advantageous. He had calculated that Clara would endure because Clara had been enduring, and that the endurance did not cost him anything because it did not cost him anything, and that the Marchioness's remark would be managed by the passage of time and the social machinery that managed these things, and that his intervention would create an awkwardness with a family whose alliance he needed. He had been right about most of this, in the specific narrow way of being right, when you have excluded from your calculation everything that mattered. He had not been right about Clara. Clara had been enduring because she believed in the marriage, which was the specific honest accounting of why she had been doing it. Not because she had nowhere to go, which Arthur believed, but because she had made a commitment, and she was a woman who honored her commitments, and she had believed, across 2 years of honoring this one, that the honoring was worth something. The gala had been the first revision of this belief. Not its abandonment, the first revision. She had looked for him, and he had shrugged, and she had managed the Marchioness alone, and she had organized the rest of the evening with the composed quality she had been developing, and she had gone home, and she had sat at the vanity, and she had looked at herself. She had thought about the shrug. She had thought about what the shrug communicated, which was not, I am sorry, I cannot intervene without cost, but this is not a category of thing I am going to intervene in. The difference between those two things was the difference between a man who had made a difficult calculation and a man who had made an easy one. She had filed this. She had not acted on it. She had continued to honor the commitment. The hunt had been in April. Arthur's cousin had the specific quality of a man who organized his behavior around the assessment of what he could get away with, which was a quality he shared with Arthur and that she had understood, by April, to be a family characteristic rather than an individual one. The horse had been spooked. She had understood it was deliberate within the first few seconds of the event, because she had been around horses all her life, and she knew the specific quality of an animal that had been startled versus the specific quality of an animal that had been interfered with, and this was the second quality. She had gone into the ditch with the specific unhelpful thoroughness of an unplanned fall, not injured, which was the specific fortunate outcome of someone who knew how to fall and whose instinct had been correct, but considerably damaged in terms of the presentation she had been maintaining. She had been in the mud in front of the king. She had been aware of this with the specific quality of awareness that arrived when the situation was immediately both physical and social. The mud, the king's hunting party on the path, the horse, and Arthur, who had come around the bend at that moment. She had looked for him. He had looked at her. He had ridden past. She is an embarrassment, she had heard, in his voice, to one of his companions, with the quality of someone making an observation about a social event, rather than a statement about his wife in a ditch. She had been still for a moment. She had been still because the specific thing that happened when you received information that was worse than what you had prepared for required a moment of stillness before the next action was available. Then she had gotten up. She had gotten up with the composure she had, which was the composure of a woman who had decided that dignity was what she had, and who was not going to let the mud take it. She had been aware of something at the tree line. She had not looked directly. She had not been in a state where indirect attention was the only kind available. She had been in the state of getting up from a ditch in front of the king with mud on her dress, which required the full application of her composure. She had felt, at the tree line, a quality she could not name at the time. She had named it later. The throne room had been in October. The forged letters had been presented to the king with the specific, careful quality of a fabrication assembled by people who were professionals at fabrication. The seal was wrong in a way she had noticed immediately, and that she had understood was not the kind of error that professionals made accidentally, and the content had the specific tell of someone who had been given accurate intelligence about the general shape of her social relationships, but not the specific texture of them. She had been standing on the marble floor. She had been aware of the crowd in the way she was always aware of crowds, the specific information they provided about the quality of the moment, the temperature of their response, the direction the event was moving. She had been aware of the king. She had been aware of the guards. She had been aware, with the specific peripheral attending quality of someone who had been doing this for 4 years, of Arthur. She had watched him step back. She had watched the specific physical movement of a man creating distance, not dramatically, not decisively, but the particular incremental separation of someone who was positioning himself outside the boundary of the thing he did not want to be inside. She had watched the space open between them on the marble floor. She had understood, in the watching, that this was the third one, not an escalation of the first two, a different category. The first two had been failures to act. This was an active choice, the selection of his own preservation over her life, communicated through the specific physical language of the backward step. He had then said the thing, "If my wife has committed treason, she stands alone, Your Majesty. I will not risk my crown to protect a liability." She had heard it with the quality she heard things when they arrived, and confirmed what she had been preparing herself to know, but had not yet been willing to fully receive. The love she had been honoring for 4 years had taken 3 occasions to die. It died now, not with drama, with the specific clean quality of something that had been under strain for 4 years, finally breaking along the line that had been forming since January. She had felt it go. She had felt the specific cold that replaced it, which was not grief and was not anger, but the particular quality of a woman who has released something she had been holding, and who finds, in the releasing, that she is not what she was when she was holding it. She had been standing on the marble floor, alone, with the guards approaching, when the iron doors had opened. The sound of them was the specific sound of doors that were heavy and that had been opened with force, not the managed quality of doors opened by someone who was navigating a formal space, but the sound of someone who had stopped navigating and was moving through directly. She had heard the boots. She had heard the specific rhythm of boots that belonged to someone who was not adjusting their pace for the room and who was not adjusting for anyone. She had looked. She had seen Sterling. She had not known him well. She had encountered him at events, had been aware of him in the specific way that women in her position were aware of men who were significant in the world her husband moved through, had found him, in the brief social encounters, to have the quality of someone who was entirely himself, regardless of the context, which was a quality she had come to value more than she had at the beginning. She had not known he had been at the gala. She had not known he had been at the hunt. She had stood on the marble floor, and she had watched him stride to the king's table with the portfolio, and she had received, in the watching, the specific quality of information arriving that organized everything around it differently. He had placed the portfolio on the table. He had looked at her first, which was the thing she would hold on to, before the king, before the court, before the specific business of the evidence he had brought. He had looked at her. She had received the looking with the clear eyes of a woman who had just had the love for her husband die on a marble floor, and who was therefore in the particular state of someone who was seeing everything very clearly. He had looked at her with the quality of a man who was saying something he had not said before, which was, "I see you. I have always seen you. I am here." Then he had addressed the court. "There is no treason here, Your Majesty." His voice had the carrying quality of a military commander, the voice of someone who was accustomed to being heard across significant noise, and who had organized the instrument accordingly. "I have spent the last 48 hours tracking the real conspirators." She had understood, in the hearing of this, that he had known before the throne room, had known that the forged letters were coming, had spent 48 hours building the case that he was presenting now. "The forge was created by Duke Arthur's own ministers," he said, "and Arthur allowed it, hoping a scandal would make his wife submissive. The court had done what courts did when they received information of this magnitude. The specific organized chaos of people who are simultaneously processing a significant revelation and the institutional implications of the revelation." Sterling had turned to Arthur. She had watched this. She had watched Sterling turn from the king to Arthur with the specific quality of a man who had been managing a specific restraint for a long time and who had reached the end of the management and was no longer managing it. "I watched you from the shadows at the gala," Sterling said. The court was quiet. She had been very still. "When you let them mock her name," he said. "Arthur," he said the name with the quality of a man who had thought about this moment for a long time. "I stood by at the hunt," he said, "and watched you leave her in the mud." She had thought about the tree line. She had thought about the quality she had felt and had not been able to name. "I respected her vows then," he said. She had heard the specific weight of this, the restraint named, and the reason for it named, and the long duration of it acknowledged. "But today you threw your own queen to the executioner to save your cowardly skin." He had looked at Arthur with the quality of something that had been held for a long time being released in a direction. "You have denied her 3 times, he said, "and on this 3rd strike, you have officially lost her." The decree had been in the portfolio. She had not known about the decree. She would understand later that Sterling had gone to the king before the throne room, had presented the evidence in private audience the previous evening, had obtained the dissolution on the basis of the evidence of gross endangerment and marital abandonment that he had been documenting, which was the specific activity that had occupied the 48 hours he had named. He had been building the case. He had been building it not as a performance of legal proceeding, but as the specific, careful construction of a man who understood that she would need it to be irrefutable, and who had made it irrefutable before he brought it into the room. Arthur had understood what the decree was. She had watched him understand. "Clara, please." The specific quality of a man who had organized his entire understanding of his marriage around her endurance encountering the specific evidence that the endurance was over. It was a political maneuver. "You are my wife. You belong at my estate." She had looked at him. She had felt the place where the love had been, which was not empty in the dramatic sense, but clean in the specific sense of something that had been holding a great weight, and that was now holding nothing, the particular lightness that was its own kind of presence. "I looked to you at the gala," she said. Her voice had the specific quality of the composure she had developed, and that was, she understood now, going to be unnecessary in the way that armor was unnecessary when the war was over. "And you laughed," she said. "I looked to you in the mud," she said, "and you rode past." She had looked at him with the eyes that were not angry and were not pained, and were the specific quality of someone who had completed an accounting and closed it. "Today," she said, I didn't even bother looking for you, Arthur. She had let this land. Because a true queen doesn't look for a coward, she said. She accepts the protection of a warrior. She had looked at him for one final moment, with the indifference that was not performed, but was the specific, genuine quality of someone for whom this person had ceased to occupy the relevant category. Goodbye, sir, she said. She had turned. Sterling was standing where he had been standing, which was between her and the guards who had not been approaching, because the guards had understood, from the moment he had entered the room, that approaching while he was present was not a thing that was going to occur without his acknowledgement. He was looking at her. She was looking at him. She thought about the gala in January, and the specific thing she had not known was at the tree line in April, and the 48 hours he had spent building the case before he came through the iron doors. She thought about the restraint named, and the reason for it, and the duration of it. She thought about the quality of the looking, which was the same quality from the moment he had entered the throne room and had found her with his eyes before he addressed the court. She thought about what it meant to be seen. She held out her hand. Not because she had decided anything in the specific sense of the word decided. She had not had the time or the distance for the particular deliberate accounting she brought to significant choices. She held out her hand because it was the next thing, the specific, correct next thing, the action that corresponded to the truth of the moment. He took it. His hand around hers had the quality she had been missing for 4 years without knowing she was missing it, which was the quality of someone who was not calculating what the contact communicated, or what the contact cost, or what the contact would be used for. He was simply holding her hand. She was simply holding his. She had a great deal to think about. The thinking was going to take time, and the time was going to require distance from the marble floor and the court and the specific weight of the past 4 years, and she was going to need to be somewhere that was not this room. She was ready to leave this room. They walked out of the throne room together. She had been in this corridor before, many times, in the specific capacity of a duchess at the palace for various occasions, and the corridor had always had the quality of a space she was moving through to get to the event. She was moving through it now, without the event behind her. There was no performance required. There was no composure being deployed for a purpose. She was simply walking in a corridor, with her hand in Sterling's hand, which was the specific quality of an ordinary thing being extraordinary, because of the context in which you were experiencing it. She thought about the gala. You were there, she said. Yes, he said. At the end of the room, she said. Near the east window, he said. You were at the third table from the entrance. She had been at the third table. I took a step, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her. You knew, he said. I felt something in the room when she finished speaking, she said. I did not know what it was. I know now. I stopped, he said. Yes, she said. Why? Because you were managing it, he said. And because interrupting a management in progress is not a defense, it is an intrusion. He was quiet for a moment. And because it was not my place, she had thought about this. It was not your place, she said. No, he said. Not then. She had looked at the corridor. And the hunt, she said. The tree line, he said. You saw it happen, she said. Yes, he said. Arthur's cousin, she said. Yes, he said. And you watched me get up, she said. Yes, he said. He was quiet. I had my hand on the reins. I was ready to ride out. And then I watched you pull yourself up and I understood. That you would be intruding, she said. That you had already managed it, he said. And that my riding in would have been about me rather than about you. She had been very still. That is, she said, a very precise understanding. I had been thinking about it for 4 years, he said. She had looked at the corridor. And today, she said. Today, he said, with the quality of something that was simply true, you were in a position that could not be managed by you alone. And Arthur had made his position clear, and there was no longer a place I was supposed to stay out of. She had thought about the specific distinction he was drawing. The first 2 times, she had needed the space to manage. Today, she had needed something she could not provide herself. The 48 hours, she said. The evidence was assembled in 36, he said. The remaining 12 were for the documentation to be formally verified and the decree prepared. He paused. I wanted it to be complete before I walked through those doors. She had received this with the clear eyes. You prepared for every possibility, she said. Yes, he said. Including the possibility that the decree would not be necessary, she said, if the evidence had not been sufficient. The evidence was sufficient, he said. I made certain of it. She had looked at him. You have been certain about very little, she said. For 4 years. He had been quiet for a moment. I have been certain about one thing, he said. That certainty has required patience. She had held his hand with the quality of someone who was not performing anything, not the management of impression, not the deployment of composure, simply the presence of someone who was exactly where they were. I have a great deal to think about, she said. Yes, he said. And I am not going to make significant decisions on a marble floor in October, she said. No, he said. I would not ask you to. She had looked at the end of the corridor, which opened onto the palace steps, and beyond them, the specific October afternoon of London, which was doing what October afternoons did, regardless of what had happened in throne rooms. I am going to think, she said, and I am going to need time. Yes, he said. And I am going to tell you, she said, when I have thought. Because you deserve to know what I have concluded when I have concluded it. He had looked at her. Yes, he said, I would appreciate that. She had thought about the gala, and the tree line, and the iron doors and the 48 hours. Sterling, she said. Yes, he said. Thank you, she said. Not for today specifically, for all of it. For the restraint and the watching, and the understanding that her management was not a thing to be interrupted, and the 48 hours, and the iron doors, and the hand on hers in the corridor. He had understood what she meant. Yes, he said. They had reached the steps. The October afternoon was what it was. She had a great deal to think about. She had time. She was going to use it. Tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you? Was it the shrug at the gala, the tree line at the hunt, the backward step on the marble floor, the iron doors, or the corridor and the 48 hours? Drop it below. I want to know what you're carrying from this one. And tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next story opens with a woman who discovers, while settling her late father's estate, that her father had a second family, and the second family's eldest daughter has been looking for her for 30 years. I'll see you there.